So, I finally got around to playing Paper Mario the Origami King. And well, it's not bad exactly, but I can see why this wasn't held up as the triumphant return of Paper Mario. The visuals look good, the writing is pretty solid, but the combat, Jesus, the combat. I don't think I've ever been so uninterested in a game's combat system. Like, ever. And it seems to be the general consensus about the game. Pretty much no one enjoys fights at all. Just like Sticker Star and Color Splash. Which of course brings up the argument of why the series doesn't just go back to turn-based battles of the first two games, and how Thousand Year Door is still looked at as the best in the series. But why does this game still hold such high praise over 15 years later? What does it do right that the newer entries keep screwing up? Well, let's find out. The Thousand Year Door released 4 years after the first game, now on the Nintendo GameCube. Right away, there's a huge difference between the games as there's a massive step up in graphical quality. The characters look much better in my opinion, as the 2D sprites they used in the first game didn't mesh as well with the 3D world. Here, an increase in character detail, along with better use of colors, helps it look a lot better. There are more paper effects added into the environment, but not overtly so the world still feels real as opposed to a world made of paper like you'd see in later games. The story is definitely a step up compared to the first game. While as much as I love good old Bowser, especially when he's given a bit of a goofball personality, everyone can agree that the old kidnap the princess and stop him plot gets old pretty fast. Here we're introduced to the legend of the Thousand Year Door, an ancient door that supposedly has a great treasure sealed behind it. The door is located in an ancient city underneath the new hub town of Rogueport. The original city supposedly destroyed by some great calamity. But in order to open the Thousand Year Door, we'll have to find the crystal stars. And opposing us on this journey are the new villains known as the X-Nauts. The X-Nauts, being possible aliens, I'm not sure if that's ever confirmed in the game, are after the treasure themselves, hoping to use whatever it is to rule the world. They're led by Grotus, this guy who looks like he has an Xbox for a head. He's a bit more conniving and no-nonsense in comparison to Bowser, being mostly hands-off and ordering his minions to go after the stars and later Mario. The main face of the X-Nauts will be his second-in-command, Lord Crump. Crump is a blowhard and a bit of an idiot, though not completely incompetent as he's able to get one up on Mario and his team several times throughout the story, even managing to disguise himself and hang around for a whole chapter. Something so obvious to us that he breaks the fourth wall and warns us not to tell Mario. Along with Crump, Grotus has another team of minions directly opposing Mario, the Shadow Sirens. The Shadow Sirens are a shadowy trio of sisters who kind of remind me of Casper's uncles, Stretch, Fatso, and Stinky. Granted, it's not exactly one-to-one as the youngest sister throws off the look, but two of the sisters are spot on appearance-wise, and the way they treat each other is pretty similar too. The group is made up of the older sister Beldam, who leads the group and likes to throw abuse at both her sisters, Marilyn, the middle sister of few words and intelligence, and finally the youngest and cutie of the group, Vivian, constantly blamed for any inconvenience and screw up the trio encounter, even when it's clearly Beldam's fault. See? Just like the ghostly trio. Going against this group of baddies, it's a race to collect the stars and stop them from opening the door first. Or not opening it at all. As the story progresses, we learn more and more about the door and the ancient city it's located in. It starts to look more like the door has to do with whatever the Great Calamity was. So opening it may end up bringing disaster instead of riches. Going back to the setting where all of this is taking place, Rogueport is a nice contrast to Toad Town from the first game. It's this dingy, seedy place filled with thugs and criminals, streets filled with trash and buildings covered in graffiti. Its dangerous nature is sold really well by the execution platform in the middle of town. While we never actually see anyone hang from the gallows, it's still so bizarre to see a noose for killing criminals in a Mario game. Where's the crappy creepypasta about this? The town has a really diverse population, filled with the usual familiar Mario enemies, some new species, and ones from other Mario series, like the Piñatas from Mario Sunshine, or the Beanish from Superstar Saga. It's nice to see a Mario game that references all the various series and spin-offs, as opposed to modern Paper Mario. A lot of the NPCs have their own stories going on as well, with their dialogue changing each time you complete a chapter, like a son worried about his mother's gambling addiction, or the gang war between the Piñatas Syndicate and the Robos gang, or the most obvious one being Mario's dear old little brother, my man Luigi. After the first chapter, we'll bump into him as we return to Rogueport, and it turns out he's on an adventure of his own. He's traveling to assemble the Marvelous Compass and save Princess Eclair of the Waffle Kingdom. I love Luigi's whole side story in this game. As I progress through the story, he'll update us on his adventure, accompanied by a unique partner each time. At first I thought he was lying, probably feeling left out that Mario was once again out saving the day while he was stuck at home. But his various partners confirm that his story is true. Well, partially. While Luigi's stories usually make it obvious he's embellishing at least a little, his partners usually explain that Luigi ends up screwing up a lot, inflicting harm on them or screwing them over in some way. My favorite story is the one where he joins an acting competition with a piece of the compass as the prize. And everything goes perfectly fine, his partner in this chapter even praising his acting abilities. Then it turns out he was playing the part of grass, just laying down, saying nothing, and acting green. He's so bummed out by it, and it's freaking hilarious. I'm still holding out hope that Paper Luigi becomes its own game. With all this going on, you're probably wondering, what's Princess Peach up to? Well... yeah, she's kidnapped again, so the story isn't completely different from the usual, though you don't actually know that she's been kidnapped right away. Peach is the one to kick off the plot this time around as she unlocks a box that happens to have a magical map inside. Said map will guide whoever has it to the location of the crystal stars needed to unlock the 1,000-year door. The princess was originally set on going on a treasure hunt with Mario, sending him the map and inviting him to Rogueport. But because she's the damsel in distress, she ends up kidnapped instead. Originally, the X-Nauts wanted her because of the map, but as they hold her captive, it seems Grottus has some other plan for her. Like the first game, you'll get segments where you control Peach, but instead of just sitting around and sending messages to Mario, she has her own little sub-story. Peach is being guarded and observed by the X-Nauts computer, Tech XX, or just Tech. The computer, whose design just screams HAL 9000, seems to have fallen in love with Princess Peach, possibly after watching her in the shower. Ooh yeah, clean yourself up, you dirty, dirty girl. Where was I? Unable to comprehend this thing we call love, he bonds and interacts with Peach at the end of each chapter, learning more and more about human emotions and slowly growing to care about her for real. Eventually trying to help her escape, but yeah, also helping her send messages to Mario, so... While it sucks to see Peach relegated to her usual role, I do love watching her interactions with Tech. Her initial hostility melts away as she becomes nicer to Tech, the princess actually getting excited each time he calls her to his room. Peach going along with his requests and assisting him in trying to find out what his master Grottus is really up to. With new villains taking the spotlight, I'm sure Bowser is absent in this game, right? Well, it's not long before he finds out that someone else has kidnapped Peach. The King of Koopas, unable to stand someone else doing his job, heads off to Rogueport to find Peach. Honestly, as much as I love Bowser in these RPGs, he feels really shoehorned into the plot of this game. Like Peach, you'll get chances to control him at the end of each chapter, usually in short platforming levels like the normal 2D Mario games. But he's always showing up late to each encounter, being several steps behind Mario and the X-Nauts. And outside of a few boss battles with him, he doesn't interact with the main characters at all. You could cut him out of the entire game and nothing would change. I think the Mario and Luigi series balanced him better, as while he's usually not the main villain in these games, he's directly involved in assisting the Mario Bros, or getting used by the real villains. Combat remains the same as in the first game, still being turn-based and making use of action commands that let Mario do more damage against enemies when pressing the corresponding button at the right time, as well as taking less damage or no damage if guarding at the right time. He damages his foes by jumping on top of enemies, bonking them with his hammer, or using new moves unlocked with whatever badges he has equipped at the time. partners are also back from the first game and have been revamped this time around. They now serve as proper party members, having their own HP bar and being able to faint in a fight. In the first game, they couldn't die but would be disabled for a few turns after taking damage instead. You can also now change the order in which Mario and his partner attack, letting them use their special move or heal Mario with an item first, or making them the primary target in a fight depending on the enemy being fought. They don't level up like Mario does though, and still need to be powered up like in the first game. This time around you use Shine Sprites, the collectibles from Mario's Sunshine, to power them up, and need to collect 3 of them and take them to an NPC in Rogueport. I prefer this way of powering up my partners compared to the first game, as I have a little more control of who and when I want to power them up. In the first game, you have to find these blocks out in the wild to power them up, and while it's convenient in the moment as you don't have to return to town to do it, you kinda felt pressured to upgrade someone you had in your party with you, since it'd be a hassle to come back and upgrade someone else instead. Your partners in this game feel more memorable compared to the originals as well. First, they feel more fleshed out, as most of the partners in the first game lose plot relevance almost immediately after their intro chapter, if they have any at all, feeling unimportant to the story and not adding much to cutscenes, feeling like they're really just there to clear whatever specific obstacle they're designed to move. Here, each partner has some agency in their chapter, and your first partner, Goombella, even feels like the co-protagonist. She's pretty similar to Goombario from the first game, being a Goomba who's your first party member to join and can tell you info on enemies through her ability Tattle, though Goombella has a lot more personality, being very feisty in nature and speaking pretty casually to anyone she meets. Quick to snap back at most enemies during dialogue, especially ones who are hitting on her. That, and she has more urgency to the plot, as she's looking for the treasure of Rogueport as well. She introduces us to her college professor, Professor Frankly, who tells us about the nature of the map and helps us figure out where the next star is. And as the game goes by, you'll even notice she starts to develop a crush on Mario. Though in this game, Mario is basically an isekai protagonist, as just about every woman in this game falls in love with him or hits on him in some way, your other female party members included. Along with Goombella, you have Koops, the Koopa Troopa who wants to become stronger, avenge his father, and save his fellow villagers from the boss of Chapter 1, Hooktail. He fights by hiding in his shell and slamming into enemies, similar to Kooper from the first game. There's Flurry, the Wind Spirit, a former actress with an over-the-top and bombastic personality. She joins the team in Chapter 2 to help the Poonies, a little race of Pikmin-like creatures who she adores. She can blow away enemies to end battles quickly and crush them under her stage presence. Next is the newborn Yoshi, who follows you around as an egg in Chapter 3 before hatching at your time of need to help in the Glitz Pit. He's one of my favorites as you get to name him yourself and his color changes depending on how much time has passed from when you first met him to when he hatches in the story. Naturally, I gave my Yoshi the most creative of names during this last playthrough. He's versatile in battle, either ground pounding onto enemies or swallowing them up and firing them at each other. The youngest Shadow Siren, Vivian, who after the shenanigans of Chapter 4, joins Mario as he's the only person who's ever been nice to her, and like several characters in this game, develops a crush on him too. She can bypass enemy defenses, burn them, and protect Mario from attacks. And finally, there's the old sailor Admiral Bobbery, a Babam who used to sail the seas before the untimely death of his wife Scarlet. We unfortunately drag him back into the sea life as we need a captain for the ship we take in Chapter 5. However, after receiving a letter his wife wrote just before she died, he finds the encouragement to move on with his life and join Mario in his quest. He'll help us out by blowing himself up to do some serious damage on enemies. The partners don't feel as situational as the first game, so you can take any of them into a fight and do just fine. For the most part anyway. They also still have field abilities where they can tell you where to go, hit faraway switches, blow away walls, jump over gaps, and more. Though this time around there's more focus on new abilities from Mario called Paper Curses. Throughout the game, Mario will find these black treasure chests with a person trapped inside. After freeing them, they betray his good deed by casting a curse on him. The most useful and convenient curse ever. Now Mario will be able to fold himself up into an airplane to glide across areas, turn himself sideways to slip between narrow spaces, roll up into a tube to get under small passages, and turn into a boat to sail on water. The paper curses are pretty creative and are a good way to encourage revisiting certain areas, and can even be used in minigames. Returning to the topic of combat, along with the use of your jumping, hammer moves, and partners, you now have the ability to use special moves. It works like star power from the first game, being able to use different special moves depending on the crystal stars collected. For example, Sweet Treat lets you recover health and FP, Earth Tremor that creates bigger and bigger earthquakes the more you land button inputs, Art Attack that lets you draw circles around enemies for damage, and more. Once you've used a move, you'll have to wait till your star power recovers in order to use it again. In the first game, it would recover gradually turn by turn, with certain badges letting you focus to recover more. Here, there's now an audience watching Mario's fights, and how well he impresses them or appeals to them determines how fast it will refill. The main way to appeal to the crowd is successfully landing action commands when you're attacking or defending. And if you press A at the right time after landing a move, you'll perform a stylish move that will get you even more star power back. The better you do in fights, the more the audience will grow, and as that's going on, you'll match up icons at the end of the star power bar. After matching 2, it'll spin a roulette to let you try and match the third. If you do, you can recover your health, FP, or star power completely, along with the audience growing in size dramatically. This comes with a drawback though, as the more people are in the crowd, the likelihood an audience member will attack you during the fight. Luckily, it's easy to counter them if you're paying attention, as you'll get a prompt to block them by pressing X. Though they won't always attack, and sometimes an audience member will give you helpful items too. I really enjoy the flair that setting the fights on a stage and having an audience adds to battles, but I'm not a fan of how things on stage can randomly damage you. Certain attacks will cause props on stage to fall over and damage you or your enemies if not properly guarded against. But along with that, sometimes stage lights or buckets may fall on you without any real warning, and as you level up, eventually the stage will upgrade and more audience members can watch fights. This adds even more stage hazards like fog that can cause your attacks to miss, or an ice spray that can freeze you for a turn. While the game tries to balance these random hazards by letting enemies get affected too, they end up feeling more like a detriment the further I get in the game. Slowing down the pace of fights in the case of fog are feeling pointless as enemies are tough enough to tank stage props hitting them. Though in the case of fog you can use flurry or bobbery to blow it away, though the game doesn't tell you this at all. Outside of the story, there's plenty to do in the game. I completely glanced over it in my review of the first game, but there are side quests you can do in between chapters. In the first game, these took the form of Koopa Koot's favors. Located in Koopa Village, you can talk to the elderly Koopa there and he'll ask you to do a favor for him, usually requiring you to meet an NPC somewhere, retrieve an item, and return to him. They weren't really all that great, as it was a bit out of the way since you had to constantly return to Koopa Village and you had to do the favors in order. Here, side quests take the form of the Trouble Center. Located on the east side of Rogueport, there's a large board where people have posted requests for help. You can unlock more requests as the story progresses and can take them on in any order you like, though only one at a time. The rewards tend to vary, usually just paying you some coins, but 2 in particular are very useful. One will unlock an optional party member for you, and the other will let you cook 2 items to make better foods like in the first game. The optional party member in question is the badge thief known as Miss Mouse. Miss Mouse is this game's equivalent to Catwoman or Black Cat, a flirtatious cat burglar who will show up several times throughout the game, hitting on Mario and occasionally offering some helpful advice. She's usually robbing the places you find her in, stealing badges to go and resell in her own badge shop in Rogueport. Miss Mouse is a fun recurring character, and her theme song is really catchy. Her interactions with Mario and his partner's reactions to them are pretty hilarious. Koops, for example, has an obvious crush on her, while Goombella is annoyed and clearly jealous every time Miss Mouse kisses Mario. Her request comes in a few chapters after you first met her, and needs you to find a badge in Hooktail's castle from the first chapter. After getting it for her, she reveals she put it there herself as a test. Now that Mario has proved himself, she happily joins his team. She's naturally the thief of your party, and can steal items from enemies. Her attacks, while weak, can pierce an enemy's defense, and when upgraded, she can heal Mario in a pinch. Other than the request from the Trouble Center, you can take a pipe beneath Rogueport and take on the Pit of 100 Trials. The Pit is a 100-floor gauntlet, having you face off against progressively stronger enemies with each floor you beat, with a super strong boss sitting at the bottom. It can be ruthless as you can't save while you're in the pit, and if you leave at any time, you have to start from the beginning again. but the rewards you can get are worth it. Each 10 floors will give you a chest, usually with a rare badge inside. And if you make it to the 50th floor, you can get the strange sack to increase your paltry inventory size from 10 to 20. The game tries to help you a bit with an NPC selling items on every 10th floor, though at increasingly expensive prices, along with another NPC who will let you skip several floors for a price. But it's better to wait till later chapters to tackle the pit, as there are some enemies exclusive to the pit that can wipe your entire party like nothing if you're not prepared. And finally, the Pianta Parlor, a casino where you can play the slots for Pianta tokens, which can be turned in for items and badges. By completing certain requests at the Trouble Center, you can unlock more games that let you put your paper curses to good use and purchase even more items. With all the improvements and additions in this game, it must be a masterpiece, right? Well, not quite. While it's overall a better game in general, the Thousand Year Door does stumble in places. My first complaint, and anyone who's played the game will probably see this coming, is Chapter 2 and the Poonies. The prologue and the first chapter do a great job of getting things moving, throwing you into the plot immediately. It's fairly linear, but within the first hour of the game, you most likely have recruited your first two partners and made it to the entrance to Hooktail's castle. Chapter 2, on the other hand, slows things to a crawl, and really feels dragged out in certain places. The main objective of the chapter is to help Punio, a member of this little Pikmin-like race called the Poonies. They live in the Bogley Woods, and their home, the Great Tree, has been taken over by the X-Nauts, who are looking for the Crystal Star. Now this is where the game gets its first strike, as this level drags quite a lot, and has an obnoxious amount of backtracking. Sneaking into the Great Tree with Flurry's help, Punio reunites with his fellow Poonies. The group of them will follow you around now like Pikmin. You'll have to get them from area to area, have them wait in certain places to activate switches, and even get into gang wars with their enemy tribe, the Jabby. The issue is that the Poonies are easy to lose, more so when you go from 11 of them to 101. They can get stuck on objects, getting left behind, and will run off scared anytime you encounter an enemy, slowing down the pace as you'll have to take care of them first and then go back and retrieve your Poonies. And because most areas look the same, it's easy to get turned around and walk in circles. Also, fights with Jabbies are equally annoying. You technically outnumber them in both of your encounters with them, but you can still end up losing fights. Both tribes will line up and then run at each other to fight. As Mario, you can't actually contribute to the fight. Trust me, this hammer does nothing. The way to win encounters is to make sure you keep the Poonies on screen to watch them fight, so you'll have to move around the battlefield, otherwise they'll start losing fast. Nothing in the game tells you this, so you're going to lose several times before you finally figure it out, or look it up. Though later on, I did find out you could use Flurry to assist in the fight by having her blow away the Jabbies, but same thing, nothing really tells you about it. However, Chapter 3 is where the game really picks up. Heading to the floating city of Glitzville, you'll have to fight in the Glitz Pit Arena in order to climb the ranks and win the championship belt that happens to have a crystal star on it. Yep, it's a good old tournament arc. Mario joins the arena under the name of the Great Gonzalez, fighting different enemies as he works his way through the minor leagues and then the major leagues. To keep it from being just endless fights, the fight promoter Grubba will put special restrictions on each fight, sometimes requiring you to not use certain moves or having to take damage a certain amount of times before you win. While they aren't difficult, they can be annoying as they will drag out easy fights you could end in the first round. In between the fights, you'll be sucked into the conspiracy involving fighters from the arena mysteriously disappearing, including the original champion Prince Mush. What I like about this mystery is that it pulls you in multiple directions, evidence pointing the finger at different people throughout it, so the identity of the true mastermind isn't as obvious as you would think. Chapter 4 is a mixed bag, starting off pretty high but dragging towards the end. In this chapter, you'll have to look for the Crystal Star in a place known as Twilight Town. No, not that one. The townsfolk are being turned into pigs against their will, and beg for our help in stopping the guy behind it. He's hiding in the creepy steeple, using the power of the crystal star to turn villagers into pigs. It's fairly straightforward at first, getting to the steeple relatively fast and stopping the villain in record time, earning the star just as fast. However, the game pulls one over on you, and it turns out the villain stole Mario's body, leaving the real deal a literal shadow of his former self. This is where the problem begins, as you lose your partners during this section, as they all leave with the fake Mario. The real Mario now has to backtrack to Twilight Town in order to try and stop the fake, but the enemies on the way will respawn. While manageable with a partner, they're brutal when you're only using Mario. More so because you may run into an amazing Daisy, who deals a ton of damage if not guarded against properly. Add in the fact the paths are really narrow, and it's tough trying to get around them to skip fights. You'll run into the fake Mario once back in town, but can do nothing against him unless you know his real name, forcing you to run away. The game is merciful though, as this is when Vivian will join the party, but you'll now have to backtrack the creepy steeple, run away from another fright from the bad guy, and navigate the steeple to find out his true name. There's just way too much backtracking in this chapter, so by the time you finally beat the guy and learn his real name, you're just over it already. I won't cover the rest of the chapters, but it follows a similar pattern of riding high for most of it, but getting dragged down by backtracking, bad pacing, and just filler in general. Especially Chapter 7, where you spend half the chapter running back to every previous location to look for an NPC. But that said, I think the highs outweigh the lows, as when it comes to discussing the game, fans will always remember the great time they had in the Glitz Pit, or the more laid-back XS Express in Chapter 6, over the tediousness of Boggly Woods or the end of Chapter 4. Thousand Year Door took the solid foundation set out by its predecessors and improved on it in every single way. The battling system was more fleshed out thanks to the improvement to partners and the addition of an audience, adding a much needed boost to difficulty as well. While I wouldn't call the characters of the first game bland exactly, the writing and the humor in this game really helped create a lot more standout characters. Again, your partners included. The Trouble Center made side quests more accessible and with better rewards that made it worth it to complete them outside of just 100% completion. We would get new villains and an original story that wasn't just saving Peach from Bowser for the millionth time. And while the princess still serves the same role she always does, she gets an endearing sub-story as she bonds with Tech. I wouldn't call the story super compelling or original, and admittedly I was a bigger fan of Super Paper Mario's story, but it gets the job done. It keeps you entertained, and there's enough twists to keep you invested till the end. And I like that you can continue the game after beating the final boss to clean up any side quests you haven't completed, and get updated on some story beats now that the day is saved. A nice touch, as I'm never the biggest fan of RPGs that just park you before the final boss after you boot up a completed save file. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door isn't a perfect game, but it's still an amazing one. One that does so many things right and captivated so many with its story and characters, you can't blame fans for wanting another Paper Mario in this style. It would be followed up a few years later by Super Paper Mario on the Wii, that would trade the turn-based combat for a platformer with RPG elements. And while the game was divisive at the time, it would be looked at in a more positive light after the reception of Sticker Star and Color Splash, but that's another story for another video. Having replayed the game for the first time in years, I can't help but agree with the sentiment of returning to the RPG style of the first two games. I think we can all agree at this point that it's impossible to understand the mindset of Nintendo and their absolute disdain of wanting to do a game like the Thousand Year Door again. One can argue that doing the same thing again would be lazy and uninspired, but I think there's plenty of ways to grow and improve on the game's formula, and look for no better example than Bug Fables. It took the same template of the Paper Mario series and added its own identity to it. It has great world building, a solid story, interesting gameplay mechanics, and some solid character building that you don't really get in Paper Mario, due to Mario being a silent protagonist, and his partners mostly just being along for the ride. While Origami King isn't necessarily a failure of a game, and is in fact a huge step in the right direction, we're still far from the quality of the original games. And the future of Mario RPGs is uncertain at the moment, especially with the Mario and Luigi series effectively dead. But fans will still have the memories they enjoyed with this game. And who knows, maybe one day Nintendo will just go back and do the RPG stuff again. Fingers crossed. And that's the video. Thanks for watching, guys. This one took longer to come out than I wanted to, as I ended up throwing out my script and starting it from scratch, several times. I had planned to critique it beat by beat, similar to my longer videos like Resident Evil 4 and Mega Man Legends 2, but by the time I got to the third chapter in my script, I realized it was going to be really bloated. And rereading it, I realized I wasn't really saying enough and was mostly just narrating the game. So I decided to focus my thoughts and treat it like a review. But I hope you enjoyed the video either way. Let me know if you prefer this more condensed look at a game as opposed to my usual style of going over my entire playthrough. I think I know what I want to do for my next video, and it's on a longer game like Paper Mario. But I think I'm going to take the same approach of just talking about certain parts and not every little thing in the game. I may try for another video after that one before the year ends, but no promises. I have a few games in my backlog I want to play, so I don't want to keep ignoring them for more videos. Again, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like, and comment down below on what you thought. Do you agree Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is still the best in the series? Or do you prefer the more experimental style the last few games have had? And if you're new to the channel, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. I pretty much always forget to advertise them. But if you want, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. My Twitter is pretty barren as I only ever just make posts about my new videos. But on my Instagram I do post images of my latest anime purchases. If I manage to put this video up on time, have a happy Thanksgiving. I've been Fuzzy Slippers, and I'll see you later. Peace.